talks in my life. I've introduced many people in my life before, and I told my 14-year-old son today I was petrified. And the reason why I was petrified is because you don't very often get the chance to introduce your childhood hero to an audience this big. That is David Suzuki.
Free at last. Say whatever I want. First, though, may I thank the Sanghees and the Esquimalt people for caring for the land so long and leaving it for us. I guess we took it. We didn't to enjoy. I'm delighted to be here today to speak at a rally for Donald. Where are you, Donald? Are you? Thank you. It's a privilege to have this opportunity. But really, Donald, I'm sorry, I'm here because my dear friend Elizabeth May, who is the godmother of my youngest daughter and who married my youngest daughter on Labor Day weekend, said I had to be here. So here I am. But I'm happy to do so, to be here and address this crowd today because Greens understand, have always understood, there are limits to growth. Greens know that our well-being and our prosperity depend on a healthy biosphere. I only met Donald Galloway this evening, but I have known about his academic and human rights and social justice work, and I think that is a magnificent background. Greens are far more than just being about protecting trees and birds and all of that. I think that social justice issues are at the heart of the Green movement. This is a distinguished man who has devoted his life to helping some of the most disadvantaged, not only in Canada, but around the world. And I thank Donald on behalf of all of us for the work that you've already done and for volunteering your time and effort now for the Green Party. The Green Party should be very, very proud to have a person of your stature running for the Chief Charlene said, you know, she has such high regard for elders. And in fact, I'm here to speak today to all of you as an elder. I'm in the last part of my life, what I refer to as the death zone. So, because I'm at that stage in my life, no one can accuse me of a hidden agenda, of a secret desire for more fame or money or power. Any elder that's still after that has to see a doctor. They got that. And I found that as my testosterone levels drop, that I'm not thinking about sex all the time. I'm getting really smart. This is the most important part of my life because elders have something no other group in society has. We have lived a lifetime. We have made mistakes. We've suffered failures. We've celebrated a few successes. We've learned a lot through that lifetime. So now we can sift through our lives, look for nuggets of experience, for lessons, for instructions that are worth passing on to the coming generation. So I urge my elders, get the hell off the couch, get off the golf course, and get on with the most important part of your life. We're not drains on the economy as we're being demonized now, drains because of our rising costs in Social Security or medical costs. We are the repository of knowledge, of values, of wisdom, of history. And it's now our time to pass that on. I believe that it is a great privilege to live in a country that aspires to democracy, with guarantees of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of movement, and equality before the law. But these are just words, and they're easy to say when times are good. The only time these freedoms and rights and guarantees matter is when times are tough. And if we can't guarantee them then democracy fails. You don't have a democracy. My father was born in Vancouver, BC in 1909. My mother in Vancouver in 1911. They lived their entire lives in Canada. When they became adults, they weren't allowed to vote in this country. They couldn't buy property in many parts of Vancouver and British Columbia, and they were denied access to many professions and universities in this province. I was born in Vancouver in 1936. In 1941, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, everything changed for us. As Canada applied the War Measures Act that suspended all rights of citizenship, froze our assets, and ultimately forced us to move to camps deep in the Rocky Mountains. When the war was drawing to an end, we in the camps were offered two choices. We could renounce our citizenship and receive a one-way ticket to Japan. Or if we wanted to stay in this country, we had to get the hell out of British Columbia and go east of the Rockies. As you might expect, most of the people in the camps were so disillusioned with this country that they signed up to go to Japan. My parents said, look, we've never been there, that's a foreign country. We're staying, and we're going to do all we can to try to make this country live up to what its ideals are claimed to be. My point in recounting this is to remind you of how difficult it is to live up to the words that we mouth, to the grand notion of what our democracy is. Canada failed that test in World War II, and Canada failed again in October 1970. We never get enough democracy. We always have to work hard to get more of it. I spent 8 years in the United States getting an education that wasn't possible to get in this country at that time. In 1957, I was beginning my final year at Amherst College in Massachusetts. And on October 4th, we were electrified to hear the announcement that the Soviet Union had launched Sputnik. We didn't know that there was a space program going on. And for any of you that were old enough to remember that time, while it was electrifying to know that we had actually launched a satellite, it was also terrifying. Because as the American rockets blew up on the launch pad, or took off and then blew up, the Russians announced the first animal in space, a dog, Laika. The first man in space, Yuri Gagarin. The first team of cosmonauts. The first woman, Valentina Tereshkova. And we realized how far advanced the Russians were in science, in engineering, and medicine. Thank goodness the Americans didn't roll over and say, hell, it costs too much. It'll destroy the economy to try to catch up. The Americans began to pour huge amounts of money into science, into universities, into research institutions, into students. Here I was, a foreigner living in the States, and all you had to do was say, oh, I love science, and they threw money at you. It was a glorious period to be a scientist at that time. In 1962, I had received my PhD, and I spent a year of postdoctoral research, and to my amazement, without even applying, I was receiving job offers. I got a job offer at Stanford, University of California, Davis, and grant offers were pouring in. It was a huge amount of money to try to catch up to the Russians. But I decided in 1962 that I wanted to return to Canada. Canada was different. Not better, but different, and for me, preferable. I returned to Canada because to me, Canada meant Tommy Douglas. It meant the CCF and Medicare. It meant equalization payments between the provinces. It meant the National Film Board, Quebec, the CBC, and wilderness that is the envy of the world. And I have never regretted returning to Canada. But now in the last part of my life, I see a Canada that is in danger of losing so many of the values that distinguished us from our neighbor to the south. We have a government that is run on law and order in every election, and yet once elected as a minority government, turned its back on the Kyoto Protocol. When Jean Chrétien ratified Kyoto, a Liberal, he ratified that as the Prime Minister of Canada. And he committed Canada to an international treaty. And when Mr. Putin ratified in 2004, it became international law for all of the governments that had signed it. So here was a man who ran on a law and order plank every single election, and yet who, upon being elected, then said, I'm not going to pay any attention to Kyoto. In other words, he was turning his back on an internationally binding treaty and declaring that Canada is an international outlaw. And I'm completely confused about what is meant by law and order then. This is a man who, shortly after being elected, passed a law mandating elections every 4 years on a set date, and he broke his own law within a few months and called it election. What on earth does law and order mean with the Harper government? We, at Rio, I returned for the 20th anniversary of the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio. I went this time to be a babysitter for my daughter, but I did get my delegate's badge, and at one point I was in the meeting building and got into an elevator, and in came a delegate from Africa who simply looked at my badge and he said, "Oh, you're from Canada?" And I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "Why do you even bother coming? Your country is doing everything to destroy this process." I can't tell you how humiliating it was to see what our government has reduced Canada to in the international scene. Our government has bypassed parliamentary debate, a potential vote that might have brought it down by proroguing government, not just once but twice. Our government has allowed a non-elected Senate to shoot down a bill that had passed through the House, mandating Canada to meet the Kyoto target. Our government is cutting funding for scientists and research, laying off government scientists, cancelling Arctic research programs on climate change, pulling funding from one of Canada's great contributions to the world, the experimental lake area. And we have cancelled the long-form census that is the best indicator of the state of Canada, a good snapshot of the country. Our government is muzzling scientists so they can vet whatever comes out of science through government policy. This government rams through legislation, as Elizabeth recounted, that undercuts 50 years of hard-won legislation, hiding it in an omnibus bill that is rammed through without any inspection or critical judgment, as Elizabeth said again, not a single amendment. This is not democracy. This government claims the economy is its highest priority. Well, if that was true, why on earth are they ignoring the implications of climate change? Every economist will tell you the consequences of allowing climate change to continue as it is, to allow emissions to climb as they are, will be catastrophic to the economy of the world. Our Prime Minister has never said a word, not a word, about the reality of human-induced climate change, or that it is something that we have to deal with. Instead, he canceled the few programs the Liberals had implemented to try to get some kind of reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And he argues that in order to attempt to reduce emissions will be to ruin the economy, because we're a northern country. It's a cold country. We need a lot of energy, and we're an industrialized country, and our industry demands our heavy fossil fuel use. And I say, wait a minute now. What kind of nonsense is that? I mean, those are all words, but what about Sweden, for God's sake? Sweden is a northern country like us. They're a big industrial nation, and yet since 1991 they imposed a carbon tax. Today they pay $140 a ton to put carbon into the atmosphere. They have reduced greenhouse gas emissions over 8% below 1990 levels. Not that phony baloney baseline that our government has imposed of 2010, below 1990 levels, past the Kyoto target. And during that time they've had the carbon tax, their economy grew by 44%. Mr. Harper says the economy is his expertise and concern, and yet he deliberately ignores the example of what Sweden has done to tell us we can't afford to do anything to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Canada is the most vulnerable industrialized country, vulnerable to climate change of any of the countries around the world. Why? Well, obviously we're a northern country, as Mr. Harper tells us. And we know that the warming is going on at a much greater rate in the northern part of the planet than in the temperate or even the Arctic area, in the equatorial areas of the planet. We're going through it, as the Inuit have been telling us for over 20 years now. The evidence is all there. The planet is getting warmer. We are a country with the longest marine coastline of any country in the world. When water warms, it expands. Sea level rise from thermal expansion will affect Canada more than any other country in the world. And when those great ice sheets over Greenland and Antarctica begin to fall in great amounts into the oceans, we're going to see rises not in tens of centimeters, but in meters. And that will be absolutely catastrophic for Canada. And then you think about our economy, and surely our economy is made up of climate-affected areas like agriculture, forestry. British Columbia has already lost $65 billion worth of pine trees because our winters aren't cold enough to control the mountain pine beetle. We are a country dependent on fisheries, on tourism, and on winter sports. So to say that the economy is our concern and ignore climate change, it seems to me, is absolutely irresponsible. And I'm wondering, I think that it's criminal. There should be intergenerational. There should be legal means to hold our leaders accountable for intergenerational crime. We know now what we are doing is going to reverberate more and more intensely through the lives of our children and grandchildren. This is criminal negligence on the part of our elected representatives. And I believe there is a category that should be applied. It's called willful blindness. You can put people in jail if there are areas that they should know about, but they deliberately ignore them as they go about their activities. Willful blindness is what's going on in Ottawa now, and I think that if there are any lawyers in the room, for heaven's sakes, you ought to look into that as something to hold people accountable for what they are doing. While being willfully blind then to climate, what does Mr. Harper do? He demonizes environmentalists. We're called obstructionists. We're called radical extremists. We're called agents of foreign funders. And there is someone using robocalls to deflect people from actually being able to go and vote properly. And I can tell you, as someone who knows my parents couldn't vote until after the Second World War, I take the right to vote as one of the most precious things, precious rights that we have in a democracy. And people that are trying to screw up even our right to vote by deliberately sidetracking us, it seems to me every person that cares about democracy ought to be demanding an inquiry into that pernicious act instead of trying to... Instead of trying to get the Council of Canadian suit tossed out of court. We are assaulted by vicious attack ads that are sickening as far as I'm concerned. We're driven by a government that seems to have an agenda, not an agenda for people. And when 40% of Canadians fail to vote, and governments can be elected with a majority government, with 39 or 40% of those that do vote, I don't think we have a democracy any longer. We have some kind of tyranny of a minority. And when Alan Gregg, a prominent conservative pollster, tells us Mr. Harper is undermining public discourse to run government by ideology, we are in trouble. We have to get involved. That's what you're all here for. It's more than just a matter of voting. We all have to get out on the streets, I hope, with this size of an audience. If you get out on the streets and think of the number of people that you can contact, we've got a huge, huge constituency out there that you can reach. And I wish you luck. I thank you for coming this evening and being a part of that. We've got to get involved. I believe we have to aim to make voting a civic responsibility and maybe a requirement the way they do in Australia. We have to stop corporate funding of political candidates. No, and Elizabeth, I'm sorry that you didn't mention the fact that we had a policy where taxpayers subsidized parties if you got enough of the vote. Mr. Harper canceled that. We should be going to where any candidate who is qualified should be subsidized completely by taxpayers. And that way we won't see these obscene amounts of money being spent on campaigning. But then whoever is elected is beholden to the taxpayer, the public. That's the way it should be.